Hi, this is Colin McEnroe. On today's show, I don't know too much about, the visual arts. I don't think too much about color. I guess it didn't really occur to me that there could be different degrees of the color black, different formulations of the color black. But it turns out there are, and they get blacker all the time, and somebody developed a kind of super black that artists wanted to use, but only one artist could use, and then yet another artist developed perhaps an even super black, and this all sounds a little crazy, I know. And when we explain it to you, it will sound even crazier, but you'll understand it better than you do now. And then we're going to tell you about a super version of the color white.
Igby, come in here.
I'm here, Dr. Wolfenstein, and it's Gregor.
I know that, IHOP. I want you to look at my latest creation. It's a new black.
I thought orange was the new black.
No, you're talking tuna fish. This is super duper retina scooper black. If you look right at this swatch of it, you'll go blind. Look at it, Idris.
I'm already blind. Remember? You blinded me last week.
Oh, was that caused by the monkey nerve transplant?
No.
The kryptonite enema?
Ugh, but no.
The boneless guinea pig paninis?
No, that was just lunch. And they were actually delicious. And it didn't turn me blind. It was the...
Don't say it. I remember it now. It was the toxin-vomiting brain leech. I should have known you'd be a big, whiny baby about that. Your vision will come back all by itself by March 2026. I explained that in the consent form.
You never showed me a consent form.
Of course. You never would have consented. Look, I'm going to do a quickie sight restoration so you can look at my super-duper retina scooper black and go blind again. And then we can talk about mink eyeball transplants, which I have been itching to get into, but not as much as they're going to itch your eye sockets.
Mink eyeballs? Do mink have good vision?
Always with the questions, Igraine.
Can I ask another one? What's the point of this whole color thing?
So I can license my new version of black to fashion designers and artists.
Licensing fees? That's what this boils down to? Whatever happened to the big stuff? Like crashing the moon into the earth and turning Unitarians into flies?
I don't know. But you're right. I feel like I've been losing my edge a bit lately. But you know what would give me my edge back, Ivo?
What?
Giving you a spatio-temporal hyperlink wedgie! Get over.
No, Dr. Wolfenstein, no!
The rest of you get ready for an episode about the battle to brew up the blackest black. And now, a vision in plum, Keegan Michael Mackenpoop.
Ow! So this is an example of the kind of show which, on the slenderest of pretexts, I suggest to one of the producers, and then I go away, and they spend months trying to figure this whole thing out and come up with a fabulous show that I then have to reassume ownership of. So 6 weeks ago, I said to Josh Delia, here's this thing about the color black, and I barely understand it, but it seems really interesting. And then about 6 weeks later, Josh reappeared at my side, and he had this amazing story to tell. And so we are going to tell it to you with the help of several guests. We are going to begin with the story of, sort of the invention of a new black and then another new black. You've heard that orange is the new black? Well, that's not exactly the case. Stuart Semple joins us now, contemporary British artist known for his large-scale canvases, including text and found imagery, not injury, or perhaps injury, often addressing themes in popular culture. He's the creator of several unique colors, including pink, all caps, the world's pinkest pink paint, and most recently Black 3.2, the world's blackest paint. So, well, first of all, Stuart, welcome to our conversation.
Hello, how are you doing?
So I'm doing just fine. I think a lot of people listening, probably come at this from a fairly untutored position, and they're thinking black is black. There's even a song, Black is Black. How can black be blacker? Maybe you can begin by explaining that.
Yeah, sure. So black's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's not really a colour. What you're talking about is the absence of light. Other colours bounce light back at you, and that's how we see red and green and blue. But black's different, and it's a very, very exciting thing. So black's not like the other colours, and actually some materials absorb more light than others, and ones that do that really, really well appear to be extremely black.
So you created Black 3.2, and we'll talk a little bit about the circumstances, the kind of Hegelian push and pull that resulted in the emergence of this. But before we do that, what's it like looking into Black 3.2? In other words, if I see it spread across the surface, will I, a not particularly observant mortal, know that I'm looking at a different kind of black?
Yeah, it's freakily weird. If you paint it on a 3D kind of object, it almost becomes like a void. It's a bit like a black hole. You start to lose definition. You know, if you paint it on a penny, for example, all the details seem to disappear. Black 3.2 absorbs about 98 to 99% of visible light. So it's an odd thing.
So this all kind of emerged as a result of a brouhaha in the art world that began with an artist whom you had theretofore admired, Sir Anish Kapoor, and his acquisition of something called Vanta Black from the British tech company Surrey Nanosystems. So that black, Vanta Black, was at that point the blackest black. And what happened? What made it controversial?
Well, basically what happened was a few years ago, Surrey Nanosystems announced they'd found this amazing way to grow carbon nanotubes on stuff. And they called it Vanta Black, and this stuff absorbed 99.9% of visible light. It was amazing. And they'd coat anything with it, you know, if you made cars or watches or whatever. But they made an exclusive deal with Anish Kapoor, this artist, this very big, very important, very wealthy artist, that he would be the only artist in the whole world who could use it for art. So the art community felt that was really wrong, because art should be about generosity and sharing ideas, and it seemed like a terrible thing to do. So there was this huge uproar in the art world, really, that Anish Kapoor should know better. He's this famous contemporary artist. He shouldn't be acting this way. They shouldn't make a deal with him. And any artist should have the same rights as fashion designers or, you know, other people. So it kicked off really big at that point.
Now, one of your responses, and by the way, Anish Kapoor, if that name, if you can't place that name, if you can picture the big, silvery, reflective, bean-shaped thing in Chicago's Millennium Park, that is probably here in America, Anish Kapoor's most famous work. So one of your responses was to see if you could create the pink equivalent of this, a very special and ultra pink. So tell us about that.
Well, kind of. I mean, I'd been making my own paint since I was a kid anyway, and I had this pink that was insanely pink. I mean, it's so pink it kind of hurts your eyes and you can't even photograph it. And I thought, hang on a minute, am I just being like him? I mean, I've got this awesome thing and I don't really share it with anyone. And I came up with this idea to make this performance piece. So I'd make a website, put the pink on it, and I'd make it so that anyone in the world could use this pink apart from Anish Kapoor. So when you go to buy the pink off my website, you have to agree to a legal disclaimer that you're not Anish Kapoor, you're not going to share it with him, and to the best of your knowledge, information and belief, it won't make its way into his hands. And I thought it'd be a funny piece of art world, kind of in-joke, kind of comedy, and raise a bit of awareness towards elitism and accessibility and stuff. How wrong I was. It blew up. It was insane. It went so viral. Everyone was talking about it. And like a week later, people were buying this pink by the bucket loads, and my poor mum and me and my family, we were just jarring up all this pink for weeks on end, and it became really big, really unexpected, really flipping weird. And then Anish Kapoor got the pink, and then he dipped his middle finger in it, and then he posted on his Instagram, "Up yours pink," and at that point, all hell just basically broke loose.
I feel like I'm hearing the plot of a Martin Amis novel being recited to me. I mean, it just, having followed this, obviously it's not, I'm not hearing it for the first time, but there's a way in which this, you almost would struggle to invent something this strange. The art world being rocked by this battle, first over the blackest black and then over ultra pink. And you're chuckling there in the background. I sense that you feel that a little bit.
It's totally ridiculous. I mean, it's bonkers when you think about it. You've got two kind of artists fighting over these two colours, and obviously I do care about the colours, and I want art materials to be accessible. I'd love to have a world where everyone could express themselves with whatever they like, but it just became so comedic. And then he posted the thing, and then the whole community were asking me to make a black that was better than his black, and it kind of felt like the war was on at that point,
And we're not even talking about Diamond Dust, the world's most glittery glitter, which you also made.
Yeah, that was a bit cheeky. Diamond dust's made out of shards of glass, and I think it'd be a bit nasty if anybody dipped their finger in that.
Right. It's too bad glam rock is over, because obviously you would have revolutionized it. So you do all this open source stuff, and it's open source. 7 billion people minus one are eligible to obtain your pink, your glitter, but Kapoor is not. And I assume that the art world shares your feeling, not that the art world speaks as one, but the art world shares your feeling that something as basic as color, or in the case of black, the absence of color, is not something that should be sort of kept to oneself or just licensed to one person only.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's never happened before. Like, artists have never been excluded from using something because they identify as artists before. So I think a lot of people could see the inherent sort of prejudice in that. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've wondered, and we'll talk about this even more in the second segment, but whether, say, Rembrandt or Caravaggio would have understood the conversation that we're having now. In other words, would they have understood that there are blacks and blacker blacks, and why an artist might want something so profoundly black that it sort of went into a whole new place? Or did they think of color and absence of color differently?
Oh, no, they'd have been really obsessed with it. I mean, the artists of their day, they were almost like the Hollywood movie directors. They had huge studios underneath them. They had hookups in India and China, colour men they knew, who they'd import colours. They would make paints in their studios with their assistants and closely guard their recipes. I mean, the history of art is rife with people developing colours and secret formulas and things like that. So they were always striving for punchier colours. And you only have to go to a museum and look at a Van Gogh painting to realise that if his brother hadn't have sent him great paint, we wouldn't have had these beautiful, vibrant works now. So they'd have been all over this.
So, in a way, knowing a little bit about you, this whole thing seems, I don't know, not very Stuart Semple-y in some ways. First of all, you are probably more associated with the adjective happy than you are associated with anything dark. Maybe, first of all, talk about your association with the notion of happiness.
Well, I mean, happiness is really important to me. My last big project was in the city of Denver, and it was called Happy City, and I worked with the city to do all these big public interventions where we installed an emotional baggage drop in Union Station, for example, or a giant sculptural smiley in an alleyway. I released thousands of artificial fake clouds from Tate Modern at the height of the recession because I really believe art can unite people and bring them together. I think self-expression is important. I think art's vital for us as human beings. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But at the same time, I use the internet a lot in my work, and I like to share things with people and distribute things. And the art materials feel very much like a part of that, actually. They're about inclusion and empowerment. And everything I love about art, it seemed like this Anish Kapoor thing kind of like went against. It just didn't feel genuine, generous. It felt kind of wrong.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the word happy comes up in the title of a number of your works and exhibitions. And I just wonder if you're worried now that someday in the Times it'll say Stuart Semple dead at the age of 102, famous as the black guy, the guy who invented the open source. I mean, I assume your plan is to live this down at some point.
I don't know. I don't mind what people remember me for. I just want to keep making my stuff. And if I can make things that are valuable and useful, then that's what I want to do.
Is there? I know that at one point you were quite an admirer of Anish Kapoor, and I think you even own one of his works. And one of the defenses that he's offered is that this nanotechnology company had said that this particular color would be somewhat dangerous for the amateur to use. Is there any strength in that argument that Vanta Black is really sort of best left in the hands of just a very highly trained few?
Not really, because it's not the only nano black out there. There's a couple of American companies that make it, and they're happy to serve artists. Spray paint's pretty dangerous if you inhale it. I know artists that make work with chainsaws or pouring lead into things. I think we're all grown up and sensible enough not to go and snort a load of Vanta Black.
It is interesting that this type of black, which I have to confess that I barely understand what it is we're talking about. Nanotechnology wouldn't be one of my big strengths, but it feels as though it's a network of things as opposed to a thing. I think when we think of an artist holding a palette, and with daubs of paint, we think of that paint as a thing. But it feels almost as though this color represents a network of these nanotubes.
So to put it simply, imagine you could zoom in on the stuff with a mega microscope, and then imagine a forest with loads of trees sticking up. Light would go into the forest and bounce about all over the place and not come out again, so it would look insanely black. That's how it works. So it's a lot more like a technology or a coating than a paint. Now, what we developed with the community is absolutely a paint. Similar, different way of getting a visually similar looking result.
All right, we're going to take a little break here, and then Stuart Semple is going to come back. We're going to be joined also by John Harvey, author of many books, including Men in Black and The Story of Black. You see a theme emerging there. So let's take that break, and we'll be back with more of our conversation about black.
Black is all I see, and so can't slip into the black. Everything's black. The darkest ever seen fact.
This is Colin McEnroe. If you're just tuning in, we are having a conversation today about black. But I don't know, not your mother and father's black, certainly not your grandfather's black. This has so far been a conversation about a kind of black that only recently came into existence and has been, therefore, somewhat controversial. With us is Stuart Semple, a contemporary British artist known for his large-scale canvases, including text and found imagery, often addressing themes in popular culture. He's the creator of several unique colors, including pink, all capitals, the world's pinkest pink paint, and most recently Black 3.2, the world's blackest black paint. Joining us now also John Harvey, Life Fellow and former Director of Studies in English at Emmanuel College at Cambridge University, an art critic and the author of many books, including Men in Black and The Story of Black. His latest novel, Pax, is entered for the 2020 UK Booker Prize. So, we should also say that we did ask Anish Kapoor, who was sort of the other side of this argument, to put it mildly, over black to come on the show, but he declined. So I'm going to ask both of you this, but maybe I'll start with you, John Harvey, since you're a new entry to the conversation. Why are we having this conversation about black and not, say, green or blue? Why is it the case that black is so heavily contested among these artists?
I think black was called the king of colors, the queen of colors, the prince of colors by some people. Other people thought that black was death, the death of the soul. It's tended all colors. Colors are very easy to use for signals and very easy to attach meanings to. But the color black, I think, has been especially useful for extreme or drastic meanings. And it's had both good, exciting, luxurious and sexy meanings and dark and terrible, nightmarish meanings.
Let's go to the artist on this. So, Stuart, what is? You've talked a little bit about this in the first segment, but say a little bit more about why black might be more important than a primary color.
I don't know. I mean, speaking for myself, I think there's just something awesome about space. You walk outside and you look up into the night sky, and it kind of goes forever. And I'm thinking about the start of when artists started making things. It's like charcoal. It comes out of fire. It's like a very basic. It's almost like no color. It feels like the building block of things, and it seems like it's the fundamentals of drawing start with that type of pigment.
Right. I'm also wondering whether it changes as we get away from non-representational art. I mean, I don't know. Once again, I don't know anything. But black in Mondrian, I mean, how different can it be in that kind of work?
I think in contemporary work, the stronger more potent the black, the more intense the work can be. I think it's useful for every artist. I mean, interestingly, there's a show on in London at the moment. It's a Rembrandt show, and we work with the curators to coat the walls in black 3. And it really gives them a different context. And I can't help but thinking if Rembrandt had access to it, he'd have loved to use it. Likewise with Caravaggio, I remember seeing his work at the Brera in Milan and being blown away at how these characters kind of came to life out of the black. And I don't think it changes because it's the present day or we're making abstract art. I think paint's paint, and it's going to be useful however you want to express yourself.
Right. John, you can talk a little bit about certain artists. Da Vinci, Matisse, Renoir, all these artists had very specific feelings about black. Maybe you can share some of them with us?
Well, Caravaggio is the artist who's perhaps the most famous for his use of black. He used it frequently. He was a swarthy man himself. He wore black. He had a black dog that he taught to do tricks. And he developed a special way of making pictures, which used more black than other artists and created a more intense effect of blackness than other artists did. It seems as though he painted the walls of his studio black, and also that he had a single light source, which was probably a little shutter in the ceiling or at the top, which would let in just a little light and illuminate people. So a part of their face or their body would be brightly lit, but the rest of their body might actually be almost black, and he would then have a kind of black shadow further behind them. And he liked the intensity of that, but I think it also suited the intensities of his nature. He was a bit like a Dostoevsky character. He was very pious on the one hand. On the other hand, he liked sort of sword fights in the street. He killed people. He may have felt he was damned for his sexual life. So I think the intensities of his life are reflected in the intensities of his art, which make a very strong use of black.
Right. As was said of Byron, Caravaggio was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And so, I mean, it seems to me, John Harvey, that's the most obvious evocation of black, too. Someone has a black heart. The black is not, for the most part, associated with the forces of goodness. Light are the forces of goodness. Light probably is the thing that in our earliest days allows us to have some control over our environment in the part of the day that is night. So, I mean, does black have any positive associations?
Well, on the one hand, there's black hearts, but on the other hand, women or attractive women may have black eyes, and they may have black hair. And Snow White in the fairy tale has jet black hair. She doesn't have black eyes, but black-eyed Susans and so forth. There's really a lot of sexy black, and also luxury black materials were given as presents between princes for as far back as you go, like things made of ebony, black marble. Black marble was used as a luxury material. So you can find the positive and the sexy and the luxury blacks. But of course, the dominant meaning has been negative and dark. And if you think of the value black has in language, it's pretty much on the negative side, to do with death and shame and disgrace, much more than exciting black.
Right. It does seem as though one of the ways that we react to black is the fact that at some level, we may not think about it consciously all the time, but we're going to get a lot less pigmented after we die. We're going to gradually turn kind of black. And I walked into an exhibit a couple of years ago at the Palais de Tokyo Museum in Paris, and they were kind of recreating the river Styx in this underworld, these little floating boats, and people could even get into them. And it was so dark, and that's the other thing that we are repeatedly told, right? That the underworld is dark, that when we die, our souls are also going to go to a place that is black.
I think, and black is, as you said before, it is connected with night and darkness and the loss of light. And the river Styx sounds a wonderful thing to have seen, as exciting as seeing, almost as if it were Venter black. And actually, the American author Edgar Allan Poe likes black water. I mean, he gives it a sort of sinister meaning, but he certainly likes to recur to black water. It is associated with very negative things. But on the other hand, shrouds might be white. And I think ghosts are white because the linen that people were wound in when they died were white. And if you go to the eastern side of the world, the colour of death is white. Funerals are much more associated with white clothes and the colour of whiteness, which is also the colour of bleached bones. So that actually, I think the two colours, black and white, have had a sort of double act in relation to death. The black playing a much stronger part in the West than in the East.
Right. And by a little spoiler alert, in a few minutes, we're going to do our final segment here about a new white that is whiter than other whites. But Stuart, I want to go to you as an artist. An artist wants to make his or her mark. I mean, that is what art was from its earliest moment. And so that's maybe the paradox here, that people trying to flee from the night, the earliest humans, Neolithic peoples, would have often gone to caves as a place to be safe from the terrors of the night. If they could bring fire with them, so much the better. And then at a certain point, they wanted to make a mark on the walls. They wanted to make pictures on the walls. And so right away, humankind is probably working in black before it works in any other color. Is that right?
It does seem to make sense that there'd be some sort of burning coal-like thing that was used, and presumably maybe a lot of that's faded away over the years, or we haven't seen it. But yeah, I think it's a basic human need, isn't it, to communicate or express in some way. And it does appear like we started doing that by making marks pretty early on, and I'd have thought they probably were quite black because that was the material that was there.
And as we move forward, I mean, as we start to communicate in a more sophisticated way, black is the default color for type, for ink, for, I mean, most of what we read, unless there's some compelling reason for it to be in red type or some other color, most of what we read to this day, thousands of years later, is still black. There's some way in which that it's this very basic communicative color. So I want the two of you to talk a little bit about something that Stuart said earlier, which I know is technically true, but I guess the question is it essentially true? And that is that black is not really a color, it's the absence of color. So, John Harvey, why don't you lead this conversation off? How do you see that question?
I think the interesting thing is that the color that black is a very low level of white. It is the same as white. It has the same balance of the spectrum colors that white does, the mix of all of them, but reduced to a very low level. Actually, if you have a sheet of paper which has only 10% of the normal whiteness of a sheet of white paper, it starts to look black to us. So in that sense, I think black is, as it were, you could say it's the tiny brother of white. It's a very low level of white light, or we invent a black as almost zero level of white light. On the other hand, the strong point for black, I think, is that we see black. It's not an absence of sight. That the way the retina works is that the cells at the back of it, they send an electrical signal both when a bright light reaches them and when they perceive a darkness. And I think the reason we do that is because when we were very primitive organisms, to find a safe, dark place was as important as seeing where you were in the daytime.
Right. So, Stuart, just react to that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get the point. I mean, I have no doubt that it is seen. There is an experience of seeing something. I'm not saying that it's invisible, and I totally agree with the fact that there's a continuum between white and black, with one being 100% white and one being zero. My point of it not being a colour is more from a sort of physics point of view, in terms of we perceive colour by the wavelengths of light that are bounced back off an object. So a red thing absorbs all the other colours apart from red, which is bounced back into your eye, which you therefore perceive. And what we're starting to see with some of these, what you could call super black materials, is that as they're sucking in more and more light, less and less is being bounced back. So from my point of view as a painter, I can dig up cobalt from the earth and it's blue, and I can hold it in my hand and I can tangibly say that's some blue colour, or I can find some cadmium and say, that's pretty red. With black, I struggle to comprehend it as a colour, because for me, we're not looking at colour, we're looking at the anti-effect of light. So maybe it's just a nuance in language, and me and John are saying the same thing in a different way.
But before I go back to John on that, though, it intrigues me, and I had devoted zero thought to this until we were getting ready for the show, but whether we're talking about your black or Kapoor's black, we're always talking in terms of the high 90% of light, right? That it's absorbing 96% of light, 99% of light. So presumably there's no such thing, or we have yet to see, maybe it exists in space, I have no idea, but Stuart, we have yet to see actual true 100% black?
No, because I think to sort of be annoying, you can close your eyes and put your jumper over your head. And it's pretty dark. It's free. No one can license it. I think we can get there.
Well, so the thing that he said before that, John Harvey, gets me back to a question for you, which is, and it's one I think that you have pondered, which is seeing blackness a sensation, or is it the absence of a sensation? Are we, in fact, seeing a thing or failing to see anything?
I think, well, how you see black, I think, depends partly on what else you're seeing. So that if you're in total darkness, I don't think you think you're seeing black. I think you think you're seeing black when you can perceive some contrast between the black thing and brighter things around it. But when you have that contrast, I think the black registers very strongly, and even more strongly with these 3.0 or Venta black. And as to finding black pigment, I take Stuart's point about the coloured pigments and blues and reds that one can mix to make a paint. But also people have made black paint since the beginning of time, especially using soot. The Egyptians did it, and the people in the caves did it, as you said earlier, Colin.
So, we'll leave that question because we'll let our listeners have fights about it over their cocktails tonight. But I want to just talk a little bit about the paradox of black, John Harvey, particularly in the world of fashion. We see two different things happening. One of them obviously is, whether we're talking about Coco Chanel or somebody else, the notion of black being a huge part of high fashion, being something elegant. That's why we have all these conversations about whether orange is the new black. Something's always the new black because black is so profoundly fashionable. But there's this profoundly chic notion about black. And then there's also the black of its opposite, that plainness, with groups like the Mennonites and the Amish, widows who do not want to display any color, groups that are into self-denialism for religious purposes. They dress in black because there's something about black that does suggest a withdrawal from the world of pleasure. So, John Harvey, help us with that paradox a little bit.
Well, I think black does have these opposite values. It can be very conspicuous and smart, but it can also be very inconspicuous. It can be a way of disappearing. And for instance, in the Japanese puppet theater, the people working the puppets wear black themselves. So you're sort of, in a way you see them, but you're supposed not to see them. They're invisible. And I think black has been worn for self-effacement, for invisibility, for as long as it has been worn by other people to show their wealth or to show their smartness. So that, for instance, servants have very often worn black in the past. They've had sort of plain black liveries. I suppose what makes a big difference is luster. If the black material has some sort of luster or sheen or shine to it, reflects a bit of light somewhere, and so that you perceive a certain richness of texture or a certain quality of material, then it lends itself very much to smart or even dramatic and sexy use. If it is dulled, without reflectiveness, without luster, then it's very good for mourning and for shame and humiliation and for penitence. And what is interesting is the Victorians developed an enormously elaborate sort of style of dress suitable to funerals, developed much more elaborately by the ladies than by the gentlemen. But the point about black for mourning was that it should have no luster. So that for a period they wore sort of lusterless black silk, other materials, with every step taken possible to remove luster and shine from it. And then as you moved to half mourning, you began to be allowed to wear a little bit of black jewellery like the jet stones and so forth. But monastic orders have tended, a lot of them, to wear a very plain, light-absorbing, unreflective black. This black of anonymity, black of self-effacement, black of humility, and an extreme of grief and shame. There are these opposite extremes.
Stuart, there's another group of people who wear black, at least in stereotype, and that would be artists and intellectuals. And if I try to have a mental picture of Jackson Pollock, I imagine him in black. Sartre and de Beauvoir sitting around in black. So what's that all about? It's not about self-denialism. It's probably not about being chic either. But I do think, anyway, of the cognoscenti dressing in black.
I don't know. I mean, I spend a lot of my time at art fairs, and there's definitely a sort of international art world black going on. There's a lot of art sort of dealers looking like that. I'm thinking of Andy Warhol in the 80s in his black leather jacket and his skin-tight black jeans. I think there's a style to it. I think there's just something kind of chic and artistic and a bit sort of Parisian about the whole thing, isn't there? And something kind of glamorous and a bit sort of bohemian-ish, and also the fact that we're always thinking about what we're going to make all the time, and it's kind of easy to throw on something black. You can't really go wrong. It's like the easy choice of what to wear without looking bad, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And I also feel, Stuart, that if I were to take a stroll around MoMA today or the Pompidou, I'd see a lot of color. We just did a show last year on Sol LeWitt. We'd see these, bright lines in colors. I'd see Rothko's reds. And I wonder, where is black these days in terms of the art world? Is it the powerful thing that Caravaggio made it to be?
Gosh, you're asking about something. But there's so much art being made. True. In this last minute, probably a million artists have finished something. Really, like, if anything, for me, I'm sort of seeing the art world move towards video and performance and interactive and digital anyway, and really maybe colour's not the same conversation it was before. I think art's kind of moved on a lot, although there's fantastic colourists going on, and it's still happening. I just don't think it's, I don't think we're really having the debate about colour in art that we have in the past. There's been huge periods in art history where we've had big old discussions about that. It doesn't seem to be as much on the radar.
So, Stuart Semple, if John Harvey would like to get a tube of your Black 3.2 and stop seeing it on his computer, how does he do that?
You can go to culturehustle.com.
Culturehustle.com.
And as long as you're not Anish Kapoor and you confirm you're not Anish Kapoor, we will send it to you for what it costs us to make. Just a point on the computer thing, the pixels on your screen are either on at 255 or off at 0. There's very little differentiation. So I'm all about seeing art and colour in real life.
All right. So, John Harvey, you can own a tube of this black. And I would imagine someone as interested in black as you are might be interested in such a thing.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, does Stuart have a black work where I could actually see his black actually in practice?
Great question.
It's a great question. Sadly not, because interestingly, John, it's actually too black for my paintings. It's too much. I can't cope with it. So I don't actually use it. For me, the artwork is actually the object of the paint, and to send that to other artists. So it's like that empowering kind of performance. So it's not so much that I kind of want to use it in work. The art is the fact that there's huge art communities using it to make great art. And there's lots of them using it. You can go to the Rembrandt show at the Dulwich Picture Gallery, and you can see the walls that the curators have painted with Black 3 against his paintings, and it's a nice experience.
You have to be careful, because I did read, as I was getting ready for the show, about a thing Kapoor did, I think in Portugal, where he was trying to illustrate the abyss, and it was like this 8-foot pit, but the black that he used on it was so solid looking that a man walked right into it and fell into the pit, because it didn't look like a hole. It looked like a thing. So black can be dangerous, too. All right. Well, you guys have been so great to talk to us. Stuart Semple, contemporary British artist and the creator, most recently, of Black 3.2, but also the world's pinkest paint, P-I-N-K. John Harvey, a Life Fellow and former Director of Studies in English at Emmanuel College at Cambridge University, the author of many books, including Men in Black and The Story of Black. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, our pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Deep breath, everybody. We're going to take a little break here, and when we come back, we're going to switch gears. We're going to switch gears to white, but the whitest white of all whites.
And I had a dream. It was all black, everything.
Today's show was produced by Jack Black, Hugo Black, Louis Black, and Karen Black. Also by Josh Nalea and me, Chion Wolf. The part of Bill Curry was played by Rebecca Black, but only on Friday. Gotta get down on Friday. In the last 8 years, that Rebecca Black video has been watched 139 million times. Think about that. That's more than the population of Canada, Saudi Arabia, and Peru combined. Anyway, enough about black. And now, here's Colin talking about white.
We have been talking for a long time now about blacks, and blacks that are blacker than the blackest black you've ever seen splashed on a canvas or in the night sky. But we are going to, I guess, go to the other part of the spectrum, although I've just been re-educated about that whole question about the difference between black and white. But joining us now is Silvia Vignolini, Associate Professor at the University of Cambridge in Chemistry and Bio-Inspired Materials. She's a lead researcher and creator of a new ultra-white coating modeled on beetle scales. So welcome to our conversation, Silvia Vignolini.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So let's start with the beetle itself. What is the name of the beetle, and why is it so extremely white?
This beetle is called Cyphrocilus, and it's white. The reason why it's white, we still don't know. So we don't know from our colleague biologist, the zoologist, what is the function of this whiteness. So there are some theory that the beetle lives on white mushrooms. So it uses this whiteness to camouflage itself, but there is no real answer into this puzzle, so we still don't know why it's white. And what we know for sure, it is really efficient to make white with an incredibly small amount of material.
Right. So when you say a very small amount of material, the white is achieved by a very, very dense structure of scales, I guess, right? But tell us more about this.
Essentially, in general, to make white is not that difficult. Lots of things around us are really white. So even if milk itself, it's white in a glass. So it's not difficult to achieve white. What it is challenging is to achieve white with a really small amount of material. So if you think about, for example, something that is familiar to us, white paint, and you want to paint a wall, for example, that is before has been painted with a strong coloration like red or also even black, you know for your experience that you have to apply many layers of paint in order to have a really nice white coverage. And instead, if you are able to mimic the structure of the beetle scale, it would be possible to achieve whiteness using 20 times less of the material.
I know that this white that you are working on right now is not commercially available, not popularly available. But does it have a name yet? What is it going to be called when we really begin to see it and hear about it?
You know, when I was asked this question before, we say it doesn't have a real name because it's still white, but maybe if we want to give it a name, we will call it Cypher White because it's inspired to this fancy beetle.
Right. And so, you know, it's sort of interesting because we talked earlier in the show about this incredibly black that's achieved through a very dense network of carbon nanotubes. This is done entirely through technology, entirely in laboratories. It seems as though this beetle has done the same thing with white, but just in nature somehow, right? It basically has created a network of scales that perfectly reflect light.
Exactly. I think this is what is really fascinating of this research is because in principle you can achieve functionality that for us it's challenging to achieve in the lab, but in a cell in the condition of relative humidity and room temperature, and this is incredible. And we started to think how the beetle develop the material, and we started to think how we can also try to make similar material copying the strategies that nature essentially developed. And therefore, we started to use a material that is really similar to the one used by the beetle. The beetle uses chitin, that is a polysaccharide. And we started to use cellulose, that is a similar polysaccharide, but it's more abundant and it comes from plants. And we can reproduce the same type of network that allows us to obtain this white using really small amount of material.
So I'm trying to imagine a whiter white than what I'm familiar with. So when I think of white, because I'm sometimes a writer, I think of a blank page of paper which is dauntingly white. I'm assuming the white we're talking about is whiter than that.
It's difficult to define white because this is again question of perception. But if you measure the spectral response, our white is as white as other white material. The only main difference is that can be achieved with using a really small quantity of matter. So if you want, our white is lighter than any other white material that you have available now.
So in other words, if I want to paint my red house white with normal paint, it's going to look pink probably on the first coat, and I'm going to have to put a lot of coats and thicknesses of paint on so that the other color doesn't show through. I'm sensing that someday I won't have to do that this small amount of this powerful white will do the job.
Exactly. It has a really good coverage, essentially. You can achieve the same brightness of white, the same intensity of white using 20 times less material.
And I'm also intrigued, too, because a couple of years ago I had a small brush with melanoma, but as a result of that, I have to, be very careful about what I put on my face to make sure that I don't get too much sun exposure. And whenever I do that, I'm always wondering, well, what chemicals are in the stuff that I'm putting on my face to keep me safe, and are they all safe chemicals? So I'm liking the idea of this, which seems to be derived exclusively from these very natural products.
You did touch one of the main important application of this material, because the material is cellulose, so it's really like biocompatible, it's even edible. So what you put in your face is essentially it's a cream that contains titanium nanoparticles, and these titanium nanoparticles have been proved that they are not 100% safe. So ideally, and more in general, to try to substitute this methodology with more biocompatible material, it's not only better for us, but in principle it's also better for the environment, because cellulose is the most abundant biopolymer that we have available on the planet, and therefore it's also renewable, is a sustainable resource.
It seems there's almost a moral lesson in all this, which is that, all over the world we have chemists working in all kinds of laboratories trying to develop various products, various advances using complicated chemical combinations. And here you've found a way to do this pretty amazing thing, just using what's present in nature, just taking what these beetles are doing and mimicking it with a natural source.
Yeah, we are really proud about this because this was one of the fortunate events, and this is really important because the first time that I went to a colleague and I said that I study the optical property of a beetle, everyone was kind of surprised and asked me, why would you do that, right? And the reason why we did it is to understand how this insect could manipulate light. But when we did it in the first place, we were not thinking about application. It was really trying to understand what type of structure they can develop. It was really fundamental type of question, a fundamental science question, with not an application, a directed application in mind. But when you understand how things work, you can also then come up with good ideas on how you can exploit it in everyday life. And this is why it's really important also to support blue sky research, where we don't have at the beginning a clear idea of what is going to be the application, because often when we do so is when we find really revolutionary concepts that can be applied to and impact really the society.
All right. So don't step on a beetle because it might hold the key to the future in it. And we obviously cannot get this white yet, but we look forward to it. I think it should be called Silvia White, but who knows what it'll be called. Silvia Vignolini, Associate Professor at the University of Cambridge in Chemistry and Bio-Inspired Materials, lead researcher and creator of a new ultra-white coating modeled on these beetle scales. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much.
And to those of you listening, thank you for spending time with us too. As usual, we've told you some stories that you didn't know anything about and might stretch your imagination a little bit. So come back tomorrow and we'll do it again.